Hi, I'm Senator Janie Ward-Engelking from District 18, and just want you to know that that's Southeast Boise and South Boise. I currently sit on the JFAC committee, which is the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee, Commerce and Human Resources Committee, and Education Committee. By virtue of the fact that I sit on the Commerce and Human Resource Committee, I'm also on the Millennium Fund Committee, and also in the Change in Employee Compensation. I would also say that I was appointed to the Task Force for Higher Education this year, and also I sit on the Interim Committee for Public School Funding. So we're looking at a lot of issues this year. Many of them deal with education, but certainly we've got a lot of things on our plate, and it's been a busy session so far.
So what do you think is the biggest issue facing Idaho?
I think the biggest issue Idaho faces is education and workforce development. We know that we have, in the past we've underfunded education, and it's been a serious issue for Idaho. We have we had this, just last week we had 46 school districts with a bond or a levy for as much as, I think total, that was about $715 million that they had to come up locally because we're not taking care of that responsibility on the statewide level. We know we have a workforce development issue. We've got jobs that we don't have people here in Idaho trained to fill, and so it's an economic issue for our businesses, but it's also an education issue for us because we've underfunded education in the past. We're making a little headway, but we're still way behind.
What were some of the big things to come up just this morning?
This morning was an interesting debate on the Senate floor. We had a bill that would have taken $10 million from the Millennium Fund, and that's money that's, for those of it's from the tobacco settlement funding. And that's money that we currently use for programs for tobacco cessation and also for substance abuse to try and get people some help with substance abuse. And it would have taken $10 million of that, and it would have put it into a program to provide a little bit of primary care for a small group of people in the GAP population. This is we know that the GAP population is a serious problem. We've got 78,000 Idahoans that have been left uninsured. They make too much to qualify for Medicaid and too little to be able to get a subsidy on the health insurance exchange. So we know that's a serious problem, but $10 million is such a drop in the bucket. It would only provide a little bit of coverage for a few people, and it also, unless we're going to leverage that money, and if we wanted to use that $10 million and then get the $90 million that the federal government would allow us if we expanded Medicaid, it makes no sense for us to take the money from people who are currently needing it to quit smoking or to get off of some kind of other substance and use it to give a little tiny bit of care to the GAP population. And that bill went down today. I think the vote was 23 to 13, or maybe 22 to 13, something like that.
Do you think Medicaid expansion then, or anything to help the GAP population, do you think it's dead for this session?
Well, it's late in the session, and we tried last week to amend a bill. We tried to amend the bill that we heard this morning and radiator cap it and put Medicaid expansion on top of that so we could actually expand and cover the entire GAP population, and that failed. But so at this point, I don't see a path forward. I think we're looking at another year where we haven't taken care of this issue. This will be the fourth year where we've kicked this can down the road and haven't covered these hardworking Idahoans who deserve to have coverage. And I think it's important to remind people that about 2,100 of these people are veterans. They're people who deserve our help.
Why won't they do Medicaid expansion? Governor Otter's task force says it's the right thing.
Well, I can tell you that the comments we hear over and over again is that they don't want to take federal money for this because they don't think it's sustainable, and that the federal government, that we are overspending, and therefore we shouldn't take any more federal dollars. But the reality is we take federal dollars for education and transportation and for fires and for the agricultural industry and timber industry. And so when it's rather disingenuous to say we don't want to take any more federal money, I sit on JFAC and I see the hundreds of millions of dollars we take from the federal government every year. So it's disingenuous, I think, to use that as the reason.
Speaking of JFAC, what is it like being on JFAC? Is this your first year?
It is my first year, and it's fascinating, but it's grueling. I mean, we're there early in the morning, and we're sitting there, listening to and examining budgets for 3 and 4 hours every morning. But I think it's fascinating, and to know exactly where all the dollars are going and the pieces that play together. We have a lot of dedicated funds, federal funds, general funds, and those all play together when you're dealing with budgets. And I've been really, happy to be working on education budgets this year, among others. But education is such a key part of what we need to fund as a state. It's one of the few things that's spelled out in our Constitution that we must do, and so I've enjoyed working on those education budgets.
Some of those education budgets came up in the House today. I heard something about line items. Can you kind of explain the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussion, not only in JFAC, but certainly in the Germain Committee, Senate Ed Committee, and House Ed Committee, and really the school boards and the school administrators have said, no more line items. You tie our hands. If you really believe in local control, you need to appropriate the money and let us decide how best to spend it in our local school districts. And I really agree with that. I think what's appropriate in Boise may not be appropriate in Marsing or Homedale. And so we really need to let those local school districts and school boards have the option of designing a program that works for them and spending the money appropriately. We have to have faith that they're going to do that and do it well.
What is the most interesting thing that you think has happened so far this year?
Oh, wow. Now that's I'm not sure. I can tell you one of the things I didn't enjoy was the fact that we deleted 5 sections out of the science standards. Those science standards were written by highly skilled, highly professional teachers, science teachers, and I think they were well vetted. We took them around the state. People looked at them, had input. They were rewritten, and I just think those were probably put in place and done well, and then for the legislature to say, well, we really don't like these 5 sections. We're going to take them out if it deals with biodiversity, human impact, or climate change. And this is science. Science is, we're not debating the pros or cons. We're going to let children or students decide the pluses and the minuses, the good and the bad, or the disadvantages and the advantages. It's science, and we should be teaching all those subjects and letting students weigh in and decide, discover the truth with it, and we should not be eliminating those. So that was one of the negative things. Now, the good things are, I think we funded the 3rd step of the career ladder, which is the education piece. We put a 5-year plan in place, and this is the end of the 3rd year. So I'm excited that we kept moving forward on that, and we didn't drop the ball, and hopefully that'll happen again next year. We've got 2 more years of implementation, so I feel good about that.
Do you see any hiccups in the future with the career ladder? I know that there's been pushback in the past, but this year, it seems smooth.
Well, this was one of the big ticket years. I mean, as far as funding, we had to put $62 million in to fund the 3rd year, and I think we're going to see a big push for money next year. These are the years where we're actually funding. We're putting money in place that will actually, hopefully, incentivize highly skilled teachers to stay in Idaho, because we've done a little bit to adjust that beginning salary, but we've done very little to incentivize teachers staying in the profession and staying here in Idaho. And so the next 2 years are going to be kind of big money items. When we're talking about money and money from the general fund, it's always hard. And of course, there's always people that would like to do some revenue reduction. And when you do that, you take the things off the table that you can afford to fund. So we'll see what happens.
What happened at the end of last week with the Moyle income tax bill, with the sales tax on food? What was going on with that?
Well, it was interesting. We saw an opportunity. Representative Moyle's tax bill was voted out of committee, but it was sent to the amending order, and so there was an opportunity to what we call radiator cap his bill, and that was to take a new tax bill and put on top of his. Basically, if you think about it as a car, and all that's left is the radiator cap, that's kind of what happened. We took a new bill, and I say we, it was actually sponsored by a Republican senator, but he took his tax bill and put it on top of Moyle's, and so Representative Moyle's bill. So basically what was left was just the name, and this bill was to provide a sales tax exemption for groceries. Having said that, it's still sitting in the Senate. It's back on the amending order, so we'll see what happens. It's a big price tag. We have we have a tax credit currently on groceries, but that had maxed out, and the difference in what the credit is and what the bill would provide in tax relief would be about $50 million. So that's a big hit to the general fund, and it's of some concern. But if we're going to reduce revenue, if we're going to do some kind of tax cut, then I certainly hope that we're going to do a tax cut that benefits all Idahoans and not just the wealthiest Idahoans or Idaho corporations. We need to have a tax cut. If we're going to do that, if we can afford it, then it should benefit all Idahoans.
Were there any big budget fights this year?
Well, I think one's still in the works, and that's on transportation. We know that we're going to have to do something with our roads and bridges in the state of Idaho. When you have to close the freeway from Meridian to Caldwell because of potholes and because it's dangerous, and you have to close it for several days, that's a big problem, and it's a responsibility the state has to make sure that our roads are safe and our bridges are safe, and that's something that private citizens cannot do for themselves. So it's an issue we have to address, and I think it's the going home bill. I think we've got to do that before we're done here in the session. So I think it's got to be worked out this week. They're talking about Garvey bonds, and maybe that's part of it, but there's got to be some willingness to raise revenue to deal with our roads and bridges.
Speaking of going home, do you think you'll sine die on Friday?
I hope so. If we're not seriously going to address the transportation issue or the gap population, if we're not going to take those on and address them, then yeah, it's time to go home, because we've done the rest of the work. We've set the budgets, and for us to sit here and not address those issues makes no sense to me.
All right. Is there anything else you want to tell the audience?
Well, I would just encourage people to be involved. This in Idaho, we really do have an opportunity. It's a relatively not small geographically, but small in numbers. You have access to your legislators, and it's a citizens' legislature, and we really do want to hear from you, and we try to listen carefully and take input, and the issues we deal with are hopefully issues that Idahoans care deeply about, and that's got to be the economy, education, and the quality of life that we so enjoy here in Idaho. So thank you. I appreciate having this opportunity to talk to you.